What I learned most of all is the strategic importance of readiness. Just having, young teams, squads, platoons, companies trained, resourced, and ready to do their combat mission. It deters war. It probably prevented a lot more wars than we'll ever know. But it also is ready in case our nation has to commit us to war. Then we're sending in units that are ready. I tell all the players that they have to carry their own bags. And I thought, well, we do that in the Army all the time. You always carry your own ruck. Nobody would ever carry your load for you. You have to carry that load as part of a bigger team. So as I got promoted, I used to always tell people, carry your own bags, drive your own cars, open your own doors. You're still a person. Don't let the uniform and the rank, be an entitlement. It's not. You're put there to help now. The American military is extremely lethal, but they're also extremely compassionate. And they bring their human values to conflict with them, which I think makes them a very, very nuanced force that can see opportunities where perhaps militaries often may not see opportunities.
Hello and good morning. My name is Cassian Peña. I'm the head of development for the in-network, the National Security Academy. Today I'm joined with a very special individual, a individual that truly has an amazing background within the US Army, specifically now who ventured into the work of charity and nonprofits, helping veterans. And I'm speaking with Lieutenant General Walter Piatt. He's a three-star general, or was a three-star general, and served his country truly amazingly, and served for more than 40 years, and now is helping those wounded veterans, people which need support. So it's a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Cassie. It's a pleasure to be here.
So can we commence at the beginning? I know that you started off as a private, right? So surely from the let's just say from the bottom of the barrel, and then you worked yourself up to the top, right? How did that look like? Why did you choose to join the army in the first place?
Yeah, well, I would say some privates may say it's the other way around when they come as joking, but no, I enlisted when I was 17 years old. I was still in high school. My parents had to sign for me. And my father wanted me to be a professional football player. I wasn't big enough or fast enough, but I love the appeal of the Army serving. My father served in World War II in the Navy. A lot of my family served. Teachers in my high school served. I thought it's what you did after high school, and you would serve and then maybe get out. But I enlisted at 17. Did 4 years in the Army infantry. Was a sergeant. I was very proud of that service. I think it taught me how hard our young men and women work, that they enlist. All volunteer force serves, and the work of the military is always hard, no matter when you served. But it showed me that we really have really good people in this nation that want to sign up and commit to military service. I got to meet a lot of people that I would have never met had I, stayed in my own small hometown. So I loved that. And then I was able to get out and go to college. And then when I came back in, ironically, my fiance at the time, we thought we'd only do a few years and then get out and go to grad school, which was the plan until it wasn't. And then I got stopped lost, which means you weren't allowed to get out for the time being. And then I thought, well, the amount of years I have, maybe I'll just try to get to 20 and retire at 20. It seemed like the smart thing to do. And then over the year, September 11th happened, and I was in New York, upstate New York, with the 10th Mountain Division, and then we started to deploy a lot after 9/11. And my wife and I committed that we'll stay in as long as the military needs us, because it was a lot of demand. Everyone and everybody responded, not just the ones in uniform, but their families and children sacrificed much, to get those responsible for those attacks and to keep our own nation safe from further attacks. So it worked. And then, sure enough, 42 years later, I was allowed to retire, and it was the honor of my life to complete it at the Pentagon, to serve on the Army staff, but also side to side with some of the most patriotic people in our nation, civilians, all of the different departments, all the services. In Washington, D.C., and the Pentagon takes a lot of attacks for being inefficient or not logical, but I found it to be the opposite. These are very good people trying to wrestle with the biggest problems our country's facing, our national security. And anytime another problem comes up that may not be nationally security related, they throw it to the Pentagon to help solve. And they're all problem solvers. And it was a wonderful team to be on. I call it like a sea of 1,000 super intellectual people with great patriotism towards helping our country. But it's hard work. But if it was hard work, somebody else could do it. But I was proud to be part of that enterprise, I would say, to help prepare our nation for the future while protecting us in the present.
Mm. Oh, beautiful. Amazing. So you mentioned Mountain Infantry, right? And that is where you perhaps started out, commenced, and then you had your career within Mountain Infantry. So how is that specific section within the U.S. Army different to the broader U.S. Army, which encompasses various different sections coming together? So my main question here is how can you, for example, leading parts of the U.S. Army, how can you use the specific skills that you acquired, being just a private or then working yourself up in the Mountain Infantry, to then leading the whole U.S. Army or parts of it, which we spoke about this before, 6,000 personnel, $180 billion budget. How did that work in the first place, from going micro to macro?
Well, it took a long time. So I think, I started out as a private. I was in the 82nd Airborne Division as a paratrooper. And you learn, that's the blocking and tackling of the Army. And when our nation sends warriors, any service into harm's way, it's normally going to be young men and women at those lower ranks that are going to do our nation's bidding, or they're young pilots, but it comes at that level. And you realize the importance of teamwork, understanding your job, knowing what you have to do because your buddy to the left and right depends on you to be proficient with your weapon, to be physically fit, mentally sharp, do all those things. And so it was a good team to be on. Like every unit I got to be assigned to, I did time in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I did time at Fort Wainwright, Alaska with the airborne unit there, and then at the 101st Airborne in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And it's the same team. It's just people come together and they learn really hard tasks. They train really hard in case our nation needs you to deploy to war or protect it. So it's just a constantly training and readiness. So you learn that if they don't have what they need, that the Army would be hollow, right? If you don't have the resources and the good leadership, the quality leaders at the lowest level, it wouldn't work. You can have the greatest strategists, the greatest plan, the greatest national leaders, but without that team of teams all over all the militaries, if they didn't have the resources to do what they did and the ability to train to do what they're supposed to do in combat, it wouldn't work. And not only wouldn't you be ready for combat, you would not deter other aggressors against us. So when our military maintains a high state of readiness, what I learned most of all is the strategic importance of readiness. Just having, young teams, squads, platoons, companies trained, resourced, and ready to do their combat mission. It deters war. It probably prevented a lot more wars than we'll ever know. But it also is ready in case our nation has to commit us to war. Then we're sending in units that are ready. And I think the higher you go into the Pentagon, you never forget about that person is going to have to go do. It may be hard work, maybe late hours, maybe working over the weekend, but at the end of the day, you're probably not going. That person is. And you need to make sure that we've done all that we can to resource and give them the time to train so they can do the hard things the nation's going to ask them to do.
Mhm. Now, when it comes to readiness, would you define readiness as doing something over and over and over again and then it becoming second nature and thus ready, or how do
Yeah,
you?
there's a lot of repetition to it. Like you would never want to just fire a weapon once and then not touch it for a year, right? I mean, you want
Right.
to do it over and over and over again. But there's also goodness in doing things with repetition. It becomes very comfortable for you, so you don't have to think about it. But also when you train, you start to learn that I can't script the gameplay, that the enemy's going to get a vote. And so when you get into higher echelon of training, so of course at the individual level, repetition is absolutely vital. You got to be able to do it. You got to be able to put your weapon together blindfolded at night, all these things really well, those individual tasks, but then they build onto collective tasks, which would be larger organizational training tasks. And that's when you start to see that the enemy will get a vote, and you have to be agile and adaptive and be able to stem off the plan. I used to put it this way, training in the military, which is readiness, it prepares you for the expected. but your education prepares you for the unexpected. And I always faced the unexpected when it came to real deployments and real interface with a real human threat that was free thinking and was looking for your weaknesses as much as you were looking for their weaknesses. So you have to train individual, but you also got to do it at scale, and then you got to repeat all of that, which is a very difficult challenge for all of our services. And I think people don't realize, how important that is and how much it's done. If you like sports, you wouldn't want to have the Knicks take a month off before they play a game tonight, right? They
Right.
go into summer league, they go into training, they have a cycle, they do into lifting, they do a lot of things, and then it builds up for a NBA championship run. It's similar in military, and even if they sweep the sweep the Spurs, they're going to start all over again for next year. They're not going to rest on what they're doing. They're going to build that all back up. And individual improvement, if any of them can improve individually, I don't know how they could, but they're all remarkable. But that's kind of how it is in the military. You got to get the individual ready, but you also got to get the team ready, and then you got to keep that cycle going.
Mhm. Now, I know for civilians especially, they sometimes confront the question if they want to join the military or not, and then within that, there's a fundamental question, which is if one is willing to give, in the worst case of scenario, one's life to one's country, right? And how did you, as a young private, or even perhaps before you enlisted in the army, or then perhaps during your service, grapple with that question? What made you think like, okay, I'm willing to risk it all if that is what is necessary? What was your thought process behind that?
Well, I think all of us growing up in whatever country you grow up in, but especially in America, you see in every small town, you see the names of the people who gave the ultimate sacrifice on the statues surrounding the courthouse. There was one in my hometown in Western Pennsylvania that had the names of the 142nd Regiment from the for our nation's Civil War. And many of them saw a lot of action on Gettysburg Day One, and many of them were killed. But it had not been for that unit, this current battle would have went different. And you had to see that people stepped up to make this nation greater. They paid the ultimate sacrifice because they believed in freedom. So I always wanted to do something with that. I always wanted to honor that sacrifice. And as I became a soldier myself, you always thought that may be possible, but you always thought it's worth it because you saw how many previous militaries have been asked to pay that price, and individuals do it. But then when you see the reality of war, it changes you. I mean, war, then when you see it's the absolute worst of humanity. And if you think about it, the intentional killing of human beings by other human beings, how did this happen? But it's also necessary because we're not going to give up our freedoms and our liberties for those who want to just simply take it for a reason. So you have to have, sadly, good men and women sign up for in the military and be prepared to defend it. But we should not allow the strategic purpose of conflict and war to mask the toll it takes on the young men and women asked to fight it. We need to understand that it really does impact them, whether they're injured physically, they're all injured mentally because it does stick to you, and you need to be able to come back from war and military service. And what I do now in my current position is we help bring the warrior home, not just back. Bring them up because coming back is not coming home. They're very different things. And many of our warriors struggle for years, sometimes decades after conflict, and they never truly come home. And many families in this nation have experienced that from World War II generation, where dad probably got a good job when he got out, got offered help with education. They didn't talk about the war for 60 years. Or you got an Uncle Joe that may drink too much because he never talked about his experiences in Vietnam and he never got back to that person he was before he left. We see this so much, and now we're in a position where we can really, really do some good about this. So I think every warrior you sign up, it's an all volunteer force, that's always possible that you're going to be put in harm's way. You're going to be asked to do very dangerous things. And when you get there, you don't think about it. You don't think about the fear of it, although you're scared to death. You think about not letting your buddies down to your left and right. You think about not bringing disgrace to your hometown. You do things for very simple reasons. I never saw I never saw honor and glory in all my deployments. I just saw real good people doing very, very difficult things under the worst of circumstances for a greater cause. To bring stability to a region that had none, or to defend our country from further terrorist attacks. The American military is extremely lethal, but they're also extremely compassionate and they bring their human values to conflict with them, which I think makes them a very, very nuanced force that can see opportunities where perhaps militaries often may not see opportunities.
Mhm. And I know that you were involved, General Piatt, within various conflicts. Um, from your time looking back now, were there any scenarios which were surprising to you? How was it for you even to be a leader within these conflict zones, or you're leading personnel and you're in charge of their safeties and also to the success of a certain operation? How was that, especially post 9/11? How did that look like?
Yeah, it's never what you expect, and just the day of 9/11, just that day, being in Army's 10th Mountain Division in upstate New York and hearing, watching the towers be attacked, hearing about the Pentagon, and then later we got a call of another plane that went down, and at first the operator said it was Somerset, Pennsylvania, which is where I went to high school. It's where I graduated high school from. And then it came back minutes later and said, no, it's some small town named Shanksville. And of course, I knew where it was. It's about 8 miles from where I grew up, and that hit home. That was not expected. I signed up to be able to deploy, go anywhere my nation needed me to defend it. And here it was, my hometown was being attacked and I was not there. So it resonated with me. And then that strong desire, all of us had strong desire that we're in uniform that day to deploy. Let's go take this fight to the enemy. We're ready. We're angry. We're mad, maybe looking for revenge. But then soon, we would deploy to Uzbekistan and then Afghanistan. And that was a surprise. We never saw that type of fight coming, but that's always what happens. The next war is normally the one you're not prepared for. You're preparing for the last war or major peer competition, and then all of a sudden something happens. And we never saw planes being used as weapons to fly into the towers to kill civilians. That was shocking. But it's also war, and we have to realize that although we have great military strength, there are areas where we may have vulnerabilities, and we have to protect as well as be able to defeat our enemies. And then leading in Afghanistan, just the physical struggle of that country. I mean, it is a hard place to move. Period. It's just really difficult. But but you also saw that there are people that live in these hard places that are kind, compassionate people. They've just been that's where they were born. That's their only, that was their only crime, is they were born there. They weren't associated with the terrorist organizations or anything. So separating out who was enemy and who wasn't was incredibly complex, because the enemy didn't want you to separate them out. They wanted to blend in. So it created a extremely difficult military targeting for us, because you couldn't figure out who was friend and who was foe. And they weren't wearing uniforms that said Taliban or Al Qaeda. They were blending. That was their strength, to be able to blend in with the population and control the population. So we had to go back to some old lessons of counterinsurgency, getting people what they needed, where non-lethal aspects became more effective than lethal aspects. So non-lethal, you're helping the population sustain themselves with just basic essentials and needs. You start to separate the population from the enemy who's trying to lead them through coercion and fear. Then you start to break it away. And it for young soldiers, I would say maybe young officers, I was my second deployment to Afghanistan. I was then a battalion commander in Eastern Afghanistan. And some of the lieutenants and captains, they just tell me where the enemy is. I'm here to kill the enemy. I'm like, well, that's the problem. Where is the enemy? They're all around you. You could be in a meeting with one day, and then the next day they could try to blow you up. So you couldn't just cast one label across everybody and say it was all bad, because you would do harm to the population, which would build up sympathy for the enemy. So it was a very, very complex environment. And I can't tell you, how proud you are when you see American forces be deployed to the most complex situations and to work through it, I mean, many of them with clarity, because you'll see things that may look bad, but you don't really know where the threat is, and you remain non-lethal posture until someone else shows lethal intent, and then you respond quicker than they do. Or we're getting ready to respond with lethal means, and a young soldier, and this happened to me a couple times, where a young soldier would come up and said, we don't see weapons, back down. They would make the call, and it would be the right call. And they're making this call within split seconds, and it could have a strategic outcome. if we killed the wrong person or maybe killed a woman or a child incidentally, and that it may look as collateral. Maybe it wasn't a war crime because they didn't want to do it, but that doesn't matter to your head. You just taken a life, and it wasn't an enemy combatant, and it's also builds up sympathy for the enemy. So very, very difficult situations we place our military in, but they're ready for it and they adapt to it. And as I said, the our education prepares us for the unexpected, and we had to apply that. We had to see beyond that. There wasn't a, I guess the way to say it, there wasn't a doctoral solution that could be blindly applied to any situation where I deployed to. You had to use your foundational, was your doctrinal and your training, but then you had to adapt it to the real situation. And when you did both, our forces were very, very effective.
Very interesting, General Piatt. So if we look at it, I know that a very limited amount of people then do have the chance to become a three-star general, right? What would you say made you stand out, and what can perhaps some people listening to this that are part of the US Army or want to join take home to make them that much more special so that they can reach the rank that they actually wanna have, right?
Yeah, well, one, I never aspired to be a general officer. I don't know if one can. I'd say the first thing to do is not the Army is not a career where you can aspire to achieve a certain rank or position. I think it really demands you to be grounded on the Army values, and selfless service is one of them. And I think leaders who are selfless and are empathetic and understand the plight of the mission and can be effective are what the Army, looks for to promote. They don't promote based on performance. They do promote based on potential. And there's so many folks that could have been in my position, and I shouldn't have been selected. Every selection board that came up, when I would see the people not selected, I'd be like, that person, she's better than me. She should have made it. He should have made it. And I really mean this because it's so full of talent. It is a very tough pick that the Army does. I think all the services take their general officer, flag officer selection very seriously, and it is very well done. But it's not something, I think, if you pick somebody that wants to be there, you probably pick the wrong person. And I think most flag officers would say that. And I remember being a colonel, brigade commander in Iraq, and it was a tough deployment. It was a tough deployment, and we had to do things that weren't always popular. And I wasn't always thought to be the person that was doing all the right things. When I was there, and I remember one of my bosses told me, well, all the things you've done, you might get promoted to brigadier general, and he says, but all the things you've done, you probably won't get promoted to brigadier general. And I remember that the way he simply put that, I felt proud because everything we had to do, you're told, leave it on the field, do everything you can. You were put in command of an organization, do everything for them, never an eye for yourself to be promoted higher from that. And I think that all the leaders and the leaders, my peers that I grew up with after 9/11, they were all did that. They were selfless servers. They were fearless combat leaders. They sacrificed so much for their country. And I was proud to see them get promoted. And I was proud that, to see them move so far because of what they've done. It it for leaders in the Army now, I just tell people, trust yourself, improve yourself always. Listen to your superiors, your peers, and the soldiers that you serve. My one boss told me always be a member of three teams simultaneously. Your boss's team, your team of peers, and your team of subordinates of that organization. All of them you have to share all that with, and to make it effective, it is a team, and they want good team players. I constantly love the people I serve with. I constantly sought self-improvement, figuring out where my weaknesses were and try to improve on them in case the Army needed me to do something else. I would be prepared. And I said very honestly and clearly I would do anything the Army asked me to do. And I think when you put some caveats on some things like, well, I want to do this in order to get me there, it normally ends up not being the right path. I think the Army looks for people that would do anything for the good of the institution and the good of the soldiers they serve, not for themselves. And therefore, selfless service is such a great value. And it's an Army value, so I always said it has to be a value of general officers as well. And I tried to live that every day, that it was always the Army. It was never me. And I think you've got so many more in the Army that wear the uniform that feel that way every single day. That's why our nation's military is so good. They put the nation before self. I would say that my father used to tell me when I was younger, he'd say, never be too important that you can't get somebody else a cup of coffee. I always loved that line. And when I became kind of a colonel, I saw it in some other, actually, it was a football coach, a college football coach that taught us, because we were doing it, but he taught us, he came up to practice. He brought his college team up for a practice at our Army base. And we got out there to help them off the bus and with their equipment. And he said, I tell all the players that they have to carry their own bags. And I thought, well, we do that in the Army all the time. You always carry your own ruck. Nobody would ever carry your load for you. You have to carry that load as part of a bigger team. So as I got promoted, I used to always tell people, carry your own bags, drive your own cars, open your own doors. You're still a person. Don't let the uniform and the rank, be an entitlement. It's not. You're put there to help now. And the higher you go, I don't know if people would agree with me on this or not, but what I learned, the higher you go in the military, the less direct authority you may have. You have to be comfortable leading through influencing. And if you need authority to be a leader, you're probably not going to be a very good senior leader because now you have to talk to people that you don't necessarily have authority over. If I have a command authority like battalion command, brigade command, company command, that's very easy to lead because I have authority. Now take that up a notch where I have to talk to other allied nations, influence people to do the right things, understand where my government may have an issue with something, understand where my higher headquarters may have an issue with something. You've got to be able to understand all those nuances to bring it to the most effective recommended course of action for our decision makers. And you can't just snap your fingers anymore. If you need that, it can be frustrating. But when you understand it, you can understand that you can influence and be there. I commanded the 10th Mountain Division. And at Fort Drum, there were clear authority I had. But when I deployed to Iraq, we were part of a greater coalition ground force unit of all different coalitions, and every country came with their own caveats. And you had to understand that. And you had to understand now how could we leverage what their nation is trying to contribute to the best way, while masking the constraints or the caveats the nation may have put on them. So the higher you go, the less authority you have. It sounds odd, but it really is. And more, you've got to be an enterprise type leader where you can influence things that are outside of your span of control.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a bit like a soft power, right?
Yeah.
But all right. So I actually recently spoke to a colonel, and he told me that he would like that a mandatory military service be reinstated, right? And this is something you might want to respond to or not, but I heard from some people within the military they would want to keep it professional in the sense if you want to join, great, that's your professional job as a soldier. Or there's some people now which say, look, if we would have more people that would serve our country at least for 1 or 2 years, then they would think twice about launching into a new conflict, right? Because they'd feel part of that general mission, being that they served at least for a short period of time. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I don't think the answer is mandatory military service is what I've seen throughout our history. But I do believe a call to just service in general as a national service. And I think the younger generation that we're seeing now, I think some people criticize, say they're lazy, they don't want to serve. And I did not find that to be true in military. I found people just want to go where there's purpose. And I think there's great purpose in military service, but I also think there's great service in community service, even if it's not a full-time position or a Peace Corps, to volunteer for another organization or join an organization like our organization.
Right.
We have lots of young men and women who couldn't see themselves in the military coming here because they want to help. And the greater purpose we have, the more buy-in you have of being there. I do believe there is a portion of our nation that is not connected to military service because the numbers are just small compared to our nation. But I believe they care about the military. And I believe when we communicate with them what our nation's military does, they're very grateful, very grateful. But I think sometimes it breaks my heart when young men and women say, well, I don't see the military as purposeful work. And I'm like, it is very purposeful. I mean, when you come in, the service, the sacrifice it takes you to put a cause greater than you ahead, and it's very demanding. and you get to be around committed people working for a great purpose of defending, the Constitution of this great land. And so it's very compelling. I think it's a lack of defining how service is purposeful, and that service not just in uniform, it could be elsewhere. It could be teaching school, it could be going to poor populations within our own nation and volunteering or teaching school there for a couple of years. I think we should come up with a service model that allow the talented youth coming out of college or high school in this nation to be able to go in and see and do experience that it's powerful. And when you care about other people more than yourself and you're able to show empathy, you become a very, very, that's something you just can't get through, going to college or studying it. You have to do it. You have to see it for real. And I think it allows people to see their path in life that they want to pursue. It may bring people in the military. It may have others leave. But I think it's that call to service is what I think would be a greater way to approach it than just mandatory military service, because that could work against us.
Yes. I like that motto very much. I think that'd be definitely something of value during your part. So then if we now focus on the mindfulness, right? I know that after your long career and perhaps during it as well, you mentioned the importance of both recovering mentally and physically, especially if you were deployed, right? So what made you first come up with certain programs that help in this regard? And what impact did you see that it has still to this day, right, in the present day?
Yeah. Well, it was all by accident. Now, I'll be honest with you. I was deploying every other year after 9/11. And every year we'd come back, we'd have reintegration training. We'd sit everybody down in the classroom and we'd tell you what not to do. Don't spend all the money you saved in a year. Don't drink a year's worth of alcohol on a single weekend that you couldn't do. Don't buy a motorcycle and go 100 miles an hour this weekend. Don't do all these things. And sadly, we were seeing those things manifest themselves as warriors came back. And the more deployments they were on, the faster these things would happen. So I knew our reintegration wasn't working. And I was lucky enough that it was an Army colonel doctor who offered, hey, would you be willing to do a study on use of, I don't even think he said mindfulness, but just do a study on helping people regulate and reduce stress. And I said, yeah, sign us up. And we had a professor from University of Penn at the time and University of Georgetown, and one was a neuroscientist, the other one was like a social science professor at Georgetown, still there. And they were brilliant. And they came, as we got back from Iraq, they came over, this was 2010, and they briefed me on what they wanted to do. And they kind of described my lifestyle. And myself and the brigade sergeant major were sitting there, and they're talking about how people who don't regulate stress, start to do things on autopilot without even knowing about it. And then they're not in the moment, they're not there. And by sitting across the table, I felt like she was describing me, like personally, like, whoa, this is, we're ramped up really high, and you just don't come back from a combat deployment and slow down. It's like on a highway going at 120 miles an hour, and then you get in an elevator, you don't know how to handle the sudden stop, the calmness, everything, and you're not being able to deal with it. So we agreed to do it, but there's only a couple hundred of our soldiers were able to get into the study. I didn't make the cut because I wasn't going to deploy next time. But I learned from them what mindfulness was. And I started, it's really just quiet breathing meditation is what we started with, and try to make sure that your mind doesn't wander. It sounds really easy, but it's incredibly difficult, especially for people that are used to and believe that multitasking is a path to success. It absolutely is not. When you multitask, you do a lot of things very poorly simultaneously. That's it. So you got to learn to focus on a task at hand, really be there in the moment with full acceptance, not trying to displace anything with your own stories or thinking about the past or the future, but be there in that moment at that time. Mm-hmm. And once I started meditating, it's not a silver bullet, but I noticed small things. I went home. My wife started talking to me about something, and I remember to this day just listening, like really listening. And I remember thinking, wow, what a beautiful voice she has. She's talking to me, and I wasn't doing anything. And so she thought something was wrong with me. It's like normally husbands always spitting out the answer, like, well, you needed to, without even hearing the problem. We're problem solvers. So we don't listen. All she really wanted, and it really enlightened me that all she really wanted me to do was listen. Right. And I wasn't listening. I was trying to get to my response. And I'm playing football with my son Josh in the front yard, and he said, "Dad, what's wrong? You're not on your BlackBerry like doing emails between passes or something." And I realized then that, how many times was I with my son when I wasn't with him?
Mm,
And my wife described it really well to me after she said, well, don't deploy until you deploy.
mm,
And if you think about that, when I came home, I was always thinking about the next mission or what I did wrong in the last mission, what we got, because I always had a date to go the next time. As soon as we get back, we knew in a year, and then we'd have a series of huge training exercises to get through. So what mindfulness taught me is that you could slow this down and you could be there in the moment. And why wouldn't you want to be there with full acceptance, especially when things are at their most difficulty? Why wouldn't you want to be, have that clarity when things are the most complex? So by doing meditation training and mindfulness training every day, you learn to slow down, regulate stress, and not overreact on stimulus that would force you to act out of stress and not react out of clarity of what really the situation calls for. It took a while, and the warriors, the soldiers that did it at first were skeptical, obviously, but when you start to see results, when you start to see, hey, this is improving my weapon score, I'm shooting better, I'm doing better on personal tasks because I'm there, I'm focused, and I'm home at night, and I don't feel like, you know, um, going out with the guys or drinking. I want to just be with my wife and kids or something. And you start to see these subtle little changes, you want to do more. And what we found in that study is the more they practiced, the better the results, the less stress they experienced, and more clarity they had in difficult situations, which is something we want everyone to be. Because in the military, we train really hard physically. Everybody knows that. You say U.S. Marine, people think, oh, that's got to be really physically tough. It is tough. It's the U.S. military. It should be physically tough. But it's also mentally is the biggest challenge we face. I mean, and we don't do a lot. We do a lot physically, and we do a lot with our weapon systems to give us the most advanced technology to make us accurate. But what were we doing for our brains? The one thing we use the most. So I coined the term, mindfulness is push-ups for the brains. And we tried to relate the mindfulness and the meditation to warrior tasks and skills that would relate to them. The clarity of seeing, a population and trying to discern the enemy. It was very relevant to what these warriors were going through. And to be able to shoot something while being really calm and in that moment, so to not overreact on the wrong target, be able to be there present without judgment, to be able to respond with clarity, precision, and be able to get that right answer. It was so valuable. It didn't catch on though. I mean, we tried. There were more studies. All the studies proved to be very good. There's been a lot of literature written on this. Mindfulness is a well-used word now, but
mm.
what we found was if you practiced, 4 or 5 times a week, about 12 minutes a day, you were going to see results. The science, we've decided to follow the science. I'm still a big believer in it. It's not a silver bullet. There isn't much it is, but if you tie it into your fitness routine and add yoga into it with mindfulness, you start to build this mental clarity that allows you to enjoy your life better. And then in periods of high demand or high stress, you're calm and
Mm.
you can respond with the right response and not just a reaction built upon stress.
I think this has been very productive. Not only did we speak about the leadership skills required, now we ventured into the mindfulness. So I think it's still very important because I have the pleasure to speak with you, General Piatt, is the mission you're on now, right? As the CEO of the Wounded Warrior Project. How does that look like? What are the projects you're working on?
Mm.
What's the impact you're leaving? Because I already heard from some people that it's a great organization, a great project. So tell me more, please.
It is, and I feel blessed. When I retired, I wasn't looking for a job. I was not. 42 years in, I was ready to go be an unskilled and unpaid laborer for my daughter and finish some of her buildings. And I was happy with that. It was very therapeutic for me. I loved it. But when asked to come here and coming here, it feels like I came home to family
Mm,
because I know what warriors have been through and I know what their families have been through. I lived it. My wife has lived it with me. We know that these are great people, that some of them just need a little bit of help. So by coming here, I loved it. The organization, though, outdates me, is 23 years old. It started with a young man who was a wounded warrior that understood what it was like to wake up in a hospital bed all alone and removed from your buddies. And he just started stuffing backpacks and delivered them to casualties at Walter Reed. But he listened to them, but he also made a promise that we would be there no matter what. So for Wounded Warrior Project, for the last 23 years, we have been keeping that promise. As the needs and demands change for our warrior population and their families, we're there to help them because many of them have to face and accept the end of the life they thought they were going to have and embrace a life they didn't think was possible. Something in the course of their military service, whether they're injured badly and lose a limb, or they're injured mentally and can't make that transition back home, and they don't know what's wrong with them, and they can't find that new path. And that search can be very, very dark and very deadly with the amount of veteran suicides we see. But when we find them at Wounded Warrior Project, we get them the resources they need. We're 100% donor funded, and all our services for warriors and their family members are free because our nation wants to help them make that full transition, not just back, but home. Because if you think about it, it should not be harder to come home from war than it is to go, but it is. And that's where many struggle. We're taking more casualties from suicide that I believe should have been prevented by helping them with that transition, with that journey, with that road home, as we call it, to light that path. As you come back, you're still hypersensitive. You're still living with the guilt that you survived and your friends didn't, that you did bad things. But you got to realize how do you transition being the human being, the good and hard and tough human being that you are inside, and make a better life for yourself and your family. You have so much left to give. Your your totality of military service should not end when you take off that uniform. We need to help them find their other mission. So we offer a wide variety of programs, as I said, all free. Most of them you would think make a lot of sense. We help with people filing their VA disability claim. We're very good at that. It's a very hard bureaucratic thing to do, but it's an entitlement. They earned it in uniform. We help with financial management, job placement, but we also have a breadth of programs that help with brain and mental health issues. Some of our physical programs, we have one called Soldier Ride. We just completed Soldier Ride 250 from Jacksonville, Florida, all the way to New York City to Ground Zero. And we had different warriors ride 250 miles in each segment. And it wasn't about the physical challenge of doing that. It was about the connection. It was therapeutic. It was about showing them what their nation looks like that they help defend, that they're part of the 250th anniversary because they fought to keep this nation so free. So we took them by National Football League stadiums and football teams, thanked them. We took them to remote outback roads so you can see the country and the beauty of this country. And then we took them to Ground Zero where the war on 9/11 began so that we can see that what they did helped us to recover from those tragic attacks. So all we do is I call it getting outside and uncomfortable, because the path to healing begins with movement. And, doctors, nurses in our military, they're going to save your life. I saw it happen on battlefields that didn't happen in previous conflicts, but they can't help give you your life back. And that's what we do. We help rebuild your life that's been impacted by war, military service, and find that new path in life of hope and renewed purpose so you can give back to society and enjoy the society that you help defend.
That is amazing, General Piatt. I think many people listening to this will be very impacted by the mission of the organization. I mean, it sounds like exactly what the United States needs, right? These people gave some of them the ultimate service, and then some came back and have their family still, etc., and want to be the best husbands they can be, the best fathers they can be, etc. And through, I think, the support of the organization, they can perhaps do that, right? So, look, I think we were able to touch upon the most important things. Of course, a 4-decade career within the United States Army, and then the work you're doing now, that would be a days long conversation minimum. But I think at least we had a good holistic, we took a good holistic approach to this. So thank you very much for your time, General Piatt. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an honor to talk to you, Kat. Appreciate what you're doing. I think I tell everyone, right now, just start where you are and have good conversations. Meet other people, and it'll remind us, what a great nation we are, what great people we're made up of. And I'm proud to be part of this organization to help those men and women that help keep this nation free for really 251 years. Our military's been doing this, and that's why our nation is 250 years old. So we owe them a lot, but they're not really high maintenance. They're great men and women that
Mm,
just need a little bit of light, and that light is often appreciation to show them their road home
mm.
because they deserve to come home. And at Wounded Warrior Project, we're going to do all we can to keep our promise, find every warrior everywhere, and bring them all home, mind, body, and soul.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Beautiful.